Welcome to the Startup Leaders Show, where we learn lessons from startup founders and executives. I am your host, Lisa Dreher, and I am really excited to introduce our guest for today, Patrick Shannon, who is the founder and CEO of TrustPoint, and Chris DeMay, who is TrustPoint's founder and COO. Welcome to the show, Patrick and Chris.
Thank you, Lisa. We're really excited to be here. We've been following the show and are honored to be a part of it today.
Thanks so much for making time to be here. I know you guys are really busy. Maybe you can start by giving us just a little bit of background on yourselves and TrustPoint.
Absolutely. Patrick Shannon, as you introduced me, my background has been aerospace through and through. Did my undergrad in aerospace engineering and took a job initially at Orbital Sciences, where I spent a couple of years working classified satellite programs. Also did a little bit of rocket work for Orbital Sciences and then transitioned over to the business side. Where I did a bunch of stuff, primarily mergers and acquisitions, but also some government relations and some financial planning, and got very early exposure to all the different facets of space-based businesses. From there, I kind of recognized I wanted to go do more of the startup thing or the small company thing, and then spent the next, give or take 8 years, working for a bunch of different aerospace startups and small companies, doing everything like maritime tracking from space, a little bit of SAR work, a little bit of microsatellite development work. Just prior to TrustPoint, I had a great experience at a company called Astra Digital. And Astra Digital is a microsatellite company, helped them plan and execute a pivot, and then ended up working and leading 3 different, essentially satellite telecom type applications, some IoT, some broadband, and then some laser comm. Which is really fantastic. And in the laser comm and looking at that laser comm mission and the other stuff there, I recognized there was some fantastic innovation happening in satellites in the satellite space, but there was one sector that wasn't getting a lot of love, and that was the GPS world, especially at the space segment and the signal segment. So I started looking at ways to pursue that type of business, and eventually, essentially linked up with Chris. And over to you, Chris, for an intro.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. About a decade before we had started TrustPoint, Patrick and I met. At the time, I was a U.S. government employee. I had spent about 14 years with the DoD, doing a number of RF and signals type things. Ultimately, working in the small sat space and looking at ways that small satellite technologies could be used for dual use purposes. That knowledge allowed me to be dangerous, and I ended up leaving the government and started a company called Hawkeye 360 in 2015. Hawkeye 360 is an RF analytics company. I think they've got 27 some satellites up in space at this point. By all measures, they're doing well. But one of the things that I learned at Hawkeye was that jamming, GPS jamming and interference was something that customers wanted to know about, and Hawkeye was putting dots on a map and identifying where the jamming was taking place. And when I linked up with Patrick, we knew we had the opportunity to not only track the problem but do something to help fix it.
Wow, that's amazing. So great backgrounds, and tell us a little bit about where you're headed with TrustPoint. I mean, I know that TrustPoint was recognized as the winner of the 2024 Startup Space Competition during the satellite event, and you recently had an Air Force SBIR award for about $1.7 million, which is fantastic. So congratulations on both of those things. Tell us kind of the basics. What is TrustPoint doing then? You've kind of identified there's this issue with the GPS system. So tell us what TrustPoint is doing.
Absolutely. So in a couple of words, TrustPoint is a venture-backed company developing a fully commercial next generation GPS system and service. And the goal is to build and launch a proliferated LEO constellation of microsatellites to provide new and innovative GPS-like signals and service down to the ground. Part of that is to address some of the vulnerabilities in heritage systems like GPS, Galileo, and the other international programs that are out there, but also to improve the performance, security, and availability of said services for some next generation applications. And when we talk about that, and the next gen applications, the applications really pulling for new capability in this space. We're talking about self-driving cars, talking about advanced air mobility, urban air mobility, drone delivery, those types of things. Critical infrastructure and smart cities, which use GPS for timing and synchronization. And then there's a whole suite of things in the national security space as well that we're supporting. But the premise for the business is not just to go build this, but to take a fully clean sheet design approach to GPS as a service. The GPS program and constellation celebrated its 50th birthday last year. So it's old. And it has done some fantastic things, both for the US military and our allies, but also for the world as a whole. But that said, there's some pretty old technologies. We're trying to address some of those vulnerabilities. And just give you a quick, kind of preview of what those are. The big one, of course, is the cost of precision. Precision GPS does exist today, but it costs hundreds or thousands of dollars. And we're trying to bring that price down a couple orders of magnitude to make it accessible to many more applications that want it but can't afford precision. We're also increasing security. Right now, GPS, and a lot of folks don't recognize this per se, but GPS is one of the last remaining unencrypted services on the planet, next to SMS texting maybe. And so we have a tremendous amount of the economy and our way of life dependent on something that from a cybersecurity standpoint is pretty easy to break. In fact, our near peer adversaries are on a daily basis breaking it, but we also have kind of low end attacks today as well, because it's pretty easy for someone with a grad student level of knowledge in GPS to buy a commercial SDR, download some open source code, and attack GPS that way. Not legal, of course, but it happens. Finally, it's about availability. We are moving to new orbits. We are changing our frequencies, and those two things in particular are going to increase the availability, both for services that are required in GPS denied regions. GPS, of course, jamming and spoofing is on a rise globally, as folks may have seen in the news recently and over the past year or two. But also to bring great services to urban environments down at street level in cities like Manhattan and London and Singapore, where the tall buildings block off a lot of GPS services and cause reflections. So I guess in a nutshell, that's what we're working on. And as you mentioned, we got some great traction with the U.S. military. This most recent SBIR phase 2 is a big part of that. We're excited about what's to come.
Wow. Okay. So that is a lot to talk through. Obviously, I mean, today, I think from just a standard user perspective, an everyday person using GPS on our phone or in our car to get from place to place or things like that, I don't think we really think about the technology behind the GPS. We just presume that it's always going to be there. It's going to work for us, and we'll be able to, find the location we're trying to get to or what have you. It sounds like there's some more risk involved here than maybe we realize.
Absolutely. And actually, we think of jamming and spoofing in the news primarily near or kind of adjacent to various conflict regions and war zones. But it's also important to recognize that this is also, kind of close at home as well here in the United States. In fact, Denver International Airport and Dallas Fort Worth Airport were both shut down for a matter of 36 to 48 hours each in 2022 due to GPS interference, right? And you imagine halting commercial air travel out of a major international hub like that has pretty big economic, of course, personal pain. You can imagine the passengers wondering what's going on. But even this past weekend, we had GPS disruptions and reduction of service due to the solar storms. And so this is something that maybe 10, 15 years ago was more a conversation for experts at very specific conferences. And today is very tangible to a lot of folks on a day-to-day basis.
Right. So it sounds like you kind of mentioned that TrustPoint is launching its own commercial GPS constellation. Why is it crucial that you launch a brand new constellation to support this?
Another great question. It really comes down to a full revamp of the tech stack. Chris and I spent a lot of time early in the business trying to decide, okay, what's the best way to address a lot of these problems? And I think the big thing that came front and center is the heritage systems have backwards compatibility requirements. They already have 6 billion deployed GPS users, for instance, for the GPS system globally. That's a lot of users that need service day in and day out and are not in a position to change or evolve very quickly. And so that heritage system has to continue supporting them. So it can't update its technology quickly or its satellite architecture quickly. But a commercial company can come in and solve a lot of fundamental problems rapidly if they had, a first principles approach to GPS. And so in launching our own constellation, we're allowed to address a lot more levels of the technology stack to solve problems closer to the core of that problem, as opposed to what traditionally has been the way we solve GPS problems, which is only at the user segment level, right? Commercial companies have been innovating on GPS receivers for the better part of 30 years. They produce some great equipment, but that equipment, while it updates every maybe 18 months to 24 months over a long period of cycles, the GPS space segment only updates once every 20 years, give or take. So in some cases, you might be able to say this is equivalent of having 5G phones on something that's more akin to a 2 or 3G network. That network is still fantastic, right? Don't get me wrong. The Air Force and the Space Force have developed some exquisite systems that support a lot of users in a really great way, but there's still a lot of problems there that need to be solved. And a commercial constellation is the way to do it.
Got it. Okay. So I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I really want to dig a little bit deeper. And that is, how does TrustPoint compete with kind of the free GPS that we're accustomed to using every day?
Yeah. People do think of GPS as free, right? And we have these great constellations, taxpayers, the tax dollars pay for them. So we don't really see that direct impact of cost. And you feel like you're getting a free service. But in reality, GPS and GNSS, which is the more widely used global acronym, is actually a very large business segment. Everyone has to pay for the hardware to receive and process GPS signals. There's also a whole suite of software applications and data services that go into improving GPS solutions. It's actually kind of a fun note. So the U.S. Air Force spends about $2 billion, give or take, every year supporting their program. And then the commercial world on what they call data correction and augmentation technologies spend another roughly $50 billion a year improving and correcting that initial service that the Air Force sends down to Earth. So the market's large. Some estimates put the overall market, hardware, software, data services, at over $250 billion a year, on track to break $500 billion in the early 2030s. So I think it's safe to say we've got a pretty big market, even though at first glance, sometimes GPS does look like it's free.
Yeah, misconception, I suppose. So, Chris, I want to hear from you a little bit. What really excites you about TrustPoint's business?
Yeah, sure. Patrick and I have both been part of the space industry for quite some time now. The space community is perhaps ironically small, and finding an opportunity to build something within that community that has such a massive impact has been so exciting. As Patrick mentioned, GPS touches every aspect of our lives. So knowing that the architecture that we're building, whether it's about our space segment, our ground segment, or the user equipment, it's a big challenge, and the solution we're putting together is ultimately going to improve lives for the entire world, which is pretty incredible.
That's great. So what do you guys see as sort of the early stage use cases, those most important use cases that will be taking advantage of this new GPS network that you're building?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two sides. I'll take a little bit of the commercial side, and I'll have Chris talk a little bit to the defense side. But early on, a lot of advanced mobility applications need additional GPS services in different forms or fashions. They need cost reductions. They need security for the first time. Today, you can imagine there's various automotive and aviation-based platforms using the civil and commercial GPS services, but again, they're unencrypted. And so I think the autonomy sector, land, air, and sea, are going to be pulling hard on this. But I also think critical infrastructure is pretty big. People do think of GPS as navigation centric, but it's also our global time standard, and everything from data centers to wireless networks to power grids use that for synchronization of their infrastructure. And to some extent, that can be very critical. It's a attack vector for our foreign adversaries to look at, and it's super critical to our way of life and us being upkept. So I think the critical infrastructure and autonomy sectors are the big ones early on, including things like self-driving cars and drone delivery. But the military has some great ones too.
Yeah, sure. And if you think about the military as having parallels to some of the sectors that Patrick mentioned, obviously the military cares about autonomy and infrastructure. And the U.S. government has, in particular, has taken the approach that they want to buy what they can and build what they must, right? So taking advantage of a commercial solution like the one we're building enables us to be this dual use technology where the single solution we're building has government and commercial applications. So for every commercial application, there is that analog government use case. And in the long term, the commercial market will likely be larger just by the sheer number of devices that we can affect. But frankly, the fact that the U.S. government's been eager to engage and has identified this problem, we've had a lot of success engaging with the Air Force, Space Force, Navy, to name a few. Not only serving as champions, but frankly, a source of non-dilutive funding that's been great as we've been growing the business.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. So what is your secret to your success so far?
I would say that there's probably a couple of things. The one thing I'll hit on first is recognizing that you have to become an expert in your sector to really succeed in startup. And in space in particular, and especially in dual use space, there's a lot of dimensions you got to go become an expert in, right? It's not just the technical solution, it's modifying that to be a good product for your customers. It's not just building the product, but it's also financing it and having a really smart capital plan. And all of that is wrapped up within a bunch of constraints on the regulatory side. So I think that some of the successes on the TrustPoint side has been kind of treating all of these with a bit of equal weight and recognizing as a business, we're only going to succeed if we do really well in all four of those categories. And to that extent, having that broad kind of perspective over optimization keeps us from getting kind of too overly focused in one area, but also, in my opinion, leads to the longest value proposition for the sector.
Yeah, I'll add that Patrick's humble in the sense that he might be expert in all those things. I'm certainly not. I can tell you that building the team around us who has that expertise is critical. Picking the right team and ensuring that they're part of the decision making that, frankly, at the beginning steer the ship very dramatically, for better or worse, right? Having the right folks early on to ensure we're making good decisions will make or break the business. And we've been fortunate to have an incredible team. Employees, advisors, investors have brought us this far, and our team's only getting better as time goes on.
Wow. Well, congratulations. Is there anything, knowing what you know now, that you would do different if you were to start again?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that? I feel like
I mean, look, like, I wouldn't say they're necessarily things we do differently at this point. Like, we have a lot of battle scars from previous experiences, right? We've got a leadership team that's worked on 35 space missions. We've been a part of half a dozen startups, 75 years combined experience, right? The fact is, we have learned quite a bit, and one of the things that we've learned to ensure we're doing correctly is to make sure we have focus, right? As a team, there are so many opportunities in front of us that we could be participating in, things that we could be working on. It's easy to get distracted, so we got to work smart, right? We got to make sure we're picking the right events, the right conferences. We're exploring the universe of customers and partners, but only digging deep in meaningful relationships with the right ones. We don't want to get spread too thin. We're intentionally a very small team, and we're taking on a very large challenge. So we got to stick to the company vision and keep rowing in the same direction.
Absolutely. Okay, good advice. What do you see as, I guess, if you were to predict one thing about the future, what would that prediction be?
Yeah. So you want me to grab first, Patrick?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I mean, in the GPS space in particular, it's about commercial and government interoperability, right? Right now, the GPS solutions out there are all run by nation states, but the commercial solutions are around the corner. And TrustPoint's going to offer the best one out there, but it's going to work and interoperate with government systems, and that interoperability ensures both the performance and resilience that we all need.
Yeah, I'll also jump in there. I think there's, any technologist or our tech-based founder and startup community member is often looking to the future and thinking a little bit about, how do we get to that world we envision? Self-driving cars and flying taxis and things like that. And I think we've had some great system development and core technology development, but it still feels like we're always a few years away. To that extent, I think there's an opportunity today with a bit of a pivot towards infrastructure. And I think there's been great tech development, but it's the infrastructure that allows some of these companies that we love to see succeed proliferate beyond small fleets, 50 cars here, a couple of drones there, to hundreds of thousands of units out there. And I think that comes partially from AI to some extent, but also from really good infrastructure that supports that proliferation. And now I think with a refocus on on infrastructure, which TrustPoint's a big part of, we're going to help proliferate, empower, and enable some of those great applications.
Ooh, so exciting. I can't wait for that to come and pass. So, Patrick and Chris, what is the best way for someone to learn more about TrustPoint?
Yeah, it's easy to start at our website, trustpointgps.com. There's a contact form there if you want to reach out. I'd also recommend folks check out social media. We're pretty active on LinkedIn and a few of the other platforms. It'd be pretty straightforward to reach out to us through those platforms and learn more about partnerships, collaborations, or if you'd like to come work with us. We are always looking to grow our team as well. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you both so much for making time to be here today. And we look forward to having you on the show again as things continue to progress.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thanks, Lisa. Really appreciate you having us.
Really appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure. And I do want to take a moment to thank GuideForce for hosting these sessions. To learn more about GuideForce, you can visit guideforce.com. And we'll see you next time on the Startup Leaders Show.